this liquor license in your order or Bob?
But I didn't save it, so. Sweater. I don't know how many holes in it.
All right, welcome everybody to our Monday, March 28th Council Workshop. Let's jump right in, Ms. Manager, and get an update on CDBG.
Mr. Mayor, can we go through the, I guess it's not on your list, we have questions and answers from the prior meeting. Can we do that first, or?
Well, I didn't set the agenda. Why don't you go ahead and do whatever you want then?
All right, the meeting is canceled and we're all, no. I didn't think that's what you meant, Mr. Mayor. Is it really? Okay. Mayor and Council, you should have in your packet a letter which responds to questions that came up for your prior meeting. There were a lot of questions and there are a lot of responses. I'll try to go through these as quickly as I can. The first one had to do with model bicycle ordinance. The question is, in order to prevent bikes from riding on Woodland Avenue, does a request for signage need to be placed? The short answer is yes. Bicycles are allowed on sidewalks except when signs are erected prohibiting riding on the sidewalk. Similar question was asked about Ingersoll Avenue sidewalks, and a similar response that signs would need to be erected. There were several questions regarding the rental code as it relates to lead-based paint. This has been an object of a lot of discussion. Staff is in the audience this morning as well to augment some of the answers that are described here. First question, has all lead-based paint been abated in public housing? The answer is that as we go through those, inspectors check for deteriorated paint surfaces as part of the protocol for all inspections. If there is some evidence of lead-based paint, we implement interim controls such that they make it lead-safe. In addition, if there's any report from the EBL, which is elevated blood level testing that the school does, we are required to perform a lead-based paint risk assessment. We've done this for many years. There hasn't been any evidence of that particular problem in our public housing units. And then you'll see also in the response that prior to initiating the renovations at Southview Manor, we did a lead-based paint inspection at all of the units. We did identify some lead-based paint on the handrails. Those were removed and replaced as part of the renovation there. Otherwise, there hasn't been lead-based paint in our public housing units. And Doug, I'm looking at you. Make sure, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there lead-based paint funding to help support the cost of land for landlords? The answer is yes. Home money can be used for that purpose. You're all aware, however, that there's a lot of demands upon that money, and there are cuts being made, I believe, at the federal level, so our ability to help in that regard may be lessened. Also, it's good to point out that landlords must participate in the county's lead removal program and contribute an amount equal to what the city contributes. And if they do so and utilize those funds, they have to follow Davis-Bacon wage requirements. Last question in this area: has the MAC committee seen a draft of this ordinance? You notice in the response here that there was discussion with the county about this. The county, for some reason, indicated this would not be a good idea. I'm not sure it's entirely within the purview of the county to make that call, so I would think that it would be appropriate to bring back something to the MAC committee. Those of you who are active in that would want to perhaps give us some guidance on that point. And I would
We have had, it's discussed every MAC meeting and as a report follow-up.
I think it's the city's proposed ordinance.
The actual city of Des Moines?
Yeah, I think it's the next step in the process is what we're struggling with a bit. And I think probably what should happen is there probably needs to be some discussion with the county, in particular their health department, over the particular issues. I think there's some points of friction there. We need to kind of work through those and get it back to the MAC. It's an important
Nicely
issue.
said.
ERP update. Can we include another entity in the ERP update process? Here's the case. To the extent that we add an additional entity into the process, there would be a change in the scope of services, and we'd have to go out for a reissuance of a request for proposal. We did have significant discussion about that at the onset of the RFP process. Made several inquiries, couldn't get other folks to join in with us, but so we did proceed without other involvement of other governmental entities. I know it was the desire of the council to do that. We tried hard, couldn't get anybody to join us in that process. Next question: can we or did we negotiate the price for upgrades during the initial negotiation? Really, the question is, will we do that? And the answer is yes. There is a process called total cost of ownership over a 10-year period, and we would ask bidders when we get to that point to address those costs in the submittals they give to us. My own cautionary note about this is that I think that can be done, and the process that's outlined here is a very good one. However, I think it's fair to say that given the changes in technology that occur or whatever might happen over that 10-year period, there's still a possibility that you would have additions or changes to equipment or software that would not be envisioned in the initial go-around and may require some additional costing. But there is a very significant effort here to address that specific issue, and it will be done that way when the bids go out. We anticipate the vendor selection coming back to you in August of this year. LEED building standards are affordable housing credit projects LEED certified. The only low-income housing tax credit project that will be LEED certified is the Greystone project, which is being done by Jack Hatch's group. All projects will follow the basic energy code, and if the project utilizes home funds, will be Energy Star certified. Next question had to do with the MPO financial report. There was discussion about the rate, the per capita rate that's being charged. I think you're all aware that the MPO has gone through a process to look at their financials, and there was discussion, as a matter of fact, this past week, last Thursday, at the MPO board about adjusting the rates upward from the current 60 cents. The proposal on the table at that time was $1.13. The MPO board preliminarily approved, I guess would be my term, Mr. Mahaffey, $1.13 rate, but with the proviso that study would be done to get it back to about $1 per capita rather than the $1.13. I think the dollar rate is a reasonable one. I'm looking at Scott Sanders out here, who's done a lot of the financial work along with Alan. I think the dollar rate is feasible, but it's a function of whether or not certain state reimbursements through IDOT are provided. And if they are, it looks like we can get it back to the dollar rate. So we ask specifically for the MPO board to take that issue up at a future meeting before the $1.13 rate was locked in. And I think they...
That will go back to executive committee and then come back to the full board, yeah.
Right.
And what was approved in the budget? What was the rate that was put in the budget?
In our city budget,
Correct.
I think it was $1.
$1. Okay.
Next question, can a copy be obtained of the Nalum Plaza PAF? And I'm going to ask Alan McKinley to describe what the PAF is. No, I'm just kidding, because we're not, this was a question you asked Mayor and Council, but we're not exactly sure what the PAF is, so we answered that we'll certainly provide that to you when we know what it is. I think maybe you were referring to the RFP, perhaps. I'm not sure. I'm looking to Skip, because I think you had some of the questions about it. We're just being
Was it
too
Public Art Foundation?
Might be the
Public Art Foundation?
Well, but what's the Nalum Plaza?
Well, the question, I think, Nolan Plaza was, they were indicating that they were going to come to the Public Art Foundation for financial support of the project. So did that get...
I tell you what we're going to do is go back and research the Public Art Foundation angle of that, and we'll report back to you.
Okay.
A kind of summary of SHMID, self-supported municipal improvement districts, rates be provided. And if you turn the page on page 3, you'll see the rates in all of the districts. The short answer is the rates have essentially remained the same in all of those areas once they were initially established, with the one exception of Sherman Hill, which had a decrease in the rate in 2005, and it returned to $1.50. The one editorial comment I would make is that in the downtown area, the rate has remained and is projected to remain at $1. However, with the reduction in commercial values downtown, there would be presumably a loss of revenue for the Operation Downtown function, which is important to us because they do provide a lot of service that benefits the downtown. The next questions have to do with parking. The question you asked was what discussions have taken place with the event center to provide parking. There's a long answer here. The long story short, there's two major points here. One is that at the time that the event center seems to be asking more about parking, we just happen to have a fair amount of available parking in our system. We have relatively high vacancies. The 5th and Keel garage and the 7th and Park garage are both facilities that have a lot of vacancies. I think our tactic, to the extent we can, when we have major events, it's not the minor events that are a problem, I think, Gary, it's the major events, particularly those events that occur during the work week. So when they're conflicting with employees, those are particularly troublesome. And our tactic, long story short here, is to continue to work with the event center in the county to see if we can figure out ways to get some of their parking needs met within our parking system. It would be a shame if we had to go out, or the county had to go out and build more parking when we have so much that's vacant right now. So our tactic there needs to be one where we try to maximize the parking that we do have available. And I think a lot of that effort really should center on those two facilities of 7th and Park and 5th and Keel. Those two garages have lots of vacancies. They're relatively close to the event center. It would make sense for us to find out ways to get those facilities to be used. What is the outstanding debt on the parking system? The short answer is $21 million. We've listed the different bonds and the issues and the maturity dates in the table below. To encourage more users, can the price and structure be changed? We've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I think I've talked to some of you about that. We are going to bring something back to you in the next meeting or two, which will suggest some changes in rates, although we don't believe that it makes sense to reduce rates in the garages overall, that would lead to a pretty significant reduction in revenues. We do think there are things we can do to make the system more competitive, and particularly looking at some special event parking rates that we don't utilize now that might be a way for us to generate some revenues that we're not today. So we'll provide more detail to you on that particular point, but we do hope to have something on your agenda in the next meeting or two. And the last question, are private garage pricing below city-owned garages for public use? The short answer is generally not. We've listed here the parking rates at some of the private facilities downtown as well as ours, and they're generally all about the same. Now, what happens is you have some private operators that would offer discounts from on a case-by-case basis, but their general rate structures are generally comparable to ours. Mr. Mayor and Council, that concludes the Q&A from your questions at your last meeting. I know there was a lot here. We'd be happy to answer questions.
Does anybody have any quick questions? Well, then let's get back to the agenda as presented.
Okay.
CDBG.
Good morning, Mayor, County, members of the Council. Doug Romig, Housing Services Director. I'm going to briefly start talking about some changes within the Housing Services Department, and then Chris Johansson will address CDBG impacts. The Housing Services Department is comprised of two major divisions. We have the Housing Division, which is our public housing units and our Section 8 voucher program, and then also shortly after I took over the Housing Services Department, the Community Action Agency site offices were transferred over from Community Development to Housing Services. So that's the other major division. The primary emphasis and services that come out of the Community Action Agency is the LIHEAP program, low-income housing, energy assistant payments. We also have a food pantry at the 6 Mile site office, and we do assessment and resolution. So if we have individuals that are low income and they're running into issues with furnace repairs, or they have a medical need for a window air conditioner unit due to asthma or some other issues that are medically related, we can provide assessment and resolution to those issues, and we have funding available. The Community Action Agency is funded entirely by federal dollars and some state dollars, CDBG and CSBG funding. The Public Housing Agency is funded through HUD through an annual contributions contract. I've been the director for about a month shy of going on a year, and had an opportunity to evaluate our programs and services and our structure. I believe that there's some cost savings we can do through a reorganization.
Doug, just a second. For those of you who are following in your book, the Housing Services is the second presentation in your book. CDBG is first. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So in looking at the structure within the Housing Services Department, I currently have 6 direct reports. In combining some job functions and sort of some realignment of work, we believe I can reduce one administrative position. It will not impact service. I think it will make us more efficient and effective as an organization as we combine work functions. That savings, depending on who's retained, will be between $90,000 and $105,000. What we have done is we took 3 positions, notified those 3 individuals that those positions are being eliminated. We're adding 2 new positions back in again with the combination of work. So 2 of the 3 will be hired. One person, unfortunately, will end up being laid off at the end of that process. Within the Des Moines Community Action Agency, we are looking to change our business model. With our neighborhood site office operations, again, the primarily major function we provide is LIHEAP services. And that's an intake process where we verify age, income. They have to have their Social Security cards. There are some new requirements from the state. And so we don't provide direct service, as we're not issuing them checks. on site. We're not like a grocery store where we have to be there. They come in to get a gallon of milk or to get some aspirin. So the intent is, and the recommendation is, to close 3 of our 4 site offices. 4 Mile, which is currently operating half day, 1 day a week, Pioneer Columbus, and Logan Community Center. I have, as indicated in the letter that came from the city manager, I contacted the 9 area neighborhood associations in and around those 3 community centers. I have received support from the neighborhood associations. I personally spoken with each of the presidents of those neighborhood associations. I also went out last Thursday and Friday and made presentations to the 4 senior meal sites, 2 on the east side, East 26 and 4 Mile, also Martin Luther King and Pioneer Columbus, and received support from the seniors at those meal sites. The change of how we're going to redo business is by closing those site offices, we're going to save approximately $35,000 in rent and CAM fees, common area maintenance fees. Currently, the way our program works, if you come into our system, and here's a real-life example that happened at Logan this year, we have 4 people at Logan Community Center that provide services. One day we had 2 people call in sick. It takes about a half hour to process a LIHEAP application. So with 2 people, during the course of the day, we can serve about 14 people during that time frame because they need some time for data input. The general public comes in, they line up, they get a number, so numbers 1 through 28 get served. If you're number 29 and beyond, you get told, sorry, we can't serve you today, you need to come back tomorrow, and hopefully you're front in line and we'll get you in. The process we're going to do is we're going to set up notices. We have mailing contacts of our previous clients. We'll get posters out at these meal sites. We'll put publications out in the paper. And so in the fall, when we get ready to take LIHEAP applications, we'll get notices out. We're going to say we're going to be at Logan Community Center Monday, Tuesday, Thursday from 3 to 7 p.m. Call in for your appointment. If we have 5 people that call in to sign up, we'll send 1 staff person with a laptop computer and a scanner, do that data entry, bring it back, download it, process their application. If there's 50 people, we'll send 5 staff out. So we know we can match our resources with the need in that community. So we're still coming into the community. They're not having to drive to our central office over at 6th Avenue or down to Park Fair Mall, which we will pull some people into some vacant space we have at Park Fair Mall. So it's better customer service. When the client arrives, they know they're going to get served, and when we send staff out to a site, we know we're going to have a client to serve. Currently, if it's a rainy, dreary day, numbers are low, and we're waiting for people to come in. We believe it's a better business model, it's more efficient, and then those cost savings can be passed on to serve more people. Within the Community Action Agency operations, our expenses primarily are rent and salaries. Everything else is passed through to serve low-income families. So this frees up money for that purpose. Additionally, with the discussions in Washington, and they're looking at reduction in domestic spending reductions, this places us in a better position should that happen. As a part of that consolidation, we currently have 2 site office supervisors. We can eliminate one of those positions through this process. So between the lease reduction and the elimination of 1 full-time SPM position, we already did make 1 transfer. We had a customer service representative position. There was an opening in Public Works for a similar position. That person was transferred over on the 14th, and we've eliminated that position from our budget. So we're looking at about a $210,000 savings in that part of the operation. One of the other things we're looking at is a relocation of our administrative offices. Currently, the Housing Services Department leases space in the basement of Park Fair Mall. We've had some air quality and water issues where we've had some flooding. Even this past year, our accounting offices were flooded, and we lost some documents. We had to relocate our accounting manager for a short period of time as repairs were done. So we're investigating the potential to find centralized space somewhere in the city to reduce our overhead. We've got to do the cost-benefit analysis, so it will take time, and we'll come back to the Municipal Housing Governing Board, which is our authoritative body for public housing. But again, the intent is reduce administrative costs, reduce our overhead, and possibly seek some other tenants that would have some interest in sharing space with us. Staff has done sort of that legwork. We understand the square footage we need depending on location. We've reached out to other agencies through a survey, and we're aware of some other entities that have some interest in co-locating with us depending on location and lease terms.
Before you go on, if I could just say two things about this. One, we'll be back to you if there's any, when we get to a point of decision. So this is sort of an opening FYI kind of statement. So anything that we do in this regard will come back to this table so you know before we go down the road with it. The second thing, and Doug sort of touched on it, the opportunity here is to co-locate with some other activities. We have had a very preliminary conversation with Polk County about whether or not this is an activity they can incorporate into some of their social service kinds of operations. There's an awful lot of I won't say overlap, but they essentially were serving similar populations, and if we can co-locate those activities, I think there's an ability to really enhance the service that we're providing if we can do it with the county. That's one example. I think there are others, but we want to pursue all those kinds of angles as well.
What's the amount, the square footage that you're looking at approximately?
If we are centralized and can combine our 6th Avenue site office, 18 to 20,000 square feet. If not, if we're off of near the downtown area, probably 15,000 square feet at a minimum. Right now, we have 3 separate bays in housing services. We have about 55 staff. We rent some storage space from Parks at their Park Service Center for some of our equipment when we do rehabs, whether it's replacing window frames or door frames. So we have about a total of 65, 70 staff in and out of the office. We serve several hundred clients a day coming in and out of the offices. We do intake assessments on public housing every 2 weeks, and that brings in 50 to 75 people every 2 weeks for briefings. And then the Community Action Agency through the food pantry and just regular delivery of service is bringing in 50 to 75 to 100 people daily as well. So, and there's things that we look at. We need to make sure we're on public transportation. A lot of our clients use public transportation as their primary mode. We need to have free parking available. So as the city manager indicated, right now we're just sort of looking at options. We will come back once we determine sort of the cost benefit of various scenarios that might be beneficial to the agency. We'll be back before this body for a recommendation.
Doug, how many parking spaces are you anticipating needing?
Well, if it's just the housing operation and we keep 6th Avenue, we need 100. If we expand and we're consolidated to one location, we'd need a minimum of 150 spaces to service staff and client needs.
But you have 55 staff, is that what you said?
In the housing admin office right now, and then we have another 17 within our Community Action Agency site offices. But and then we have the briefing room, which again needs to hold 75 people because we have that number coming in every 2 weeks. So there's conference room space issues and other intake space issues that we need. Because we need one-on-one plan.
72 staff?
Between the 2 divisions.
Okay.
Yep. Now I'm getting into this evening, the Municipal Housing Governing Board will be asked to forward the agency plan to HUD. This is a plan that gets developed annually by the Housing Services Department, and it's sort of our map. Any type of changes or anything we want to implement within the Housing Services Department has to be part of our agency plan and has to be approved by HUD before we can do any implementation. One of my goals as the director is to deconcentrate low-income housing related to the Housing Services Department. One of the initiatives is selling Royal View Manor. It's a 200-unit, 9-story tower at 1101 Crocker. High concentration of low-income families. The intent to replace those public housing units, and this will take some research, but we're looking to acquire or lease no more than 10% of units within existing multifamily complexes. So Let's say there's a property owner that has a 100-unit apartment complex on the south side. We would acquire 10 units, or 10%. If the fair market value of that was $1 million, we would pay $100,000 for that right to have access to those units. The landlord would maintain the property management aspect of it through a long-term lease agreement or similar arrangement. We would contribute some of our capital funds annually that we receive from HUD in addition to the initial payment for those rights. So we can get low-income individuals into market rate areas and deconcentrate that poverty throughout the community. So if we have somebody that's a former Southsider or Eastsider or wants to live in Beaverdale, we would have opportunities then for live in their neighborhoods. Currently, the Housing Services Department has 5 apartment complexes. 4 of them are elderly designated, so you have to be 61 and a half years older to live there. If you're under 61 and a half years old, your only option is Royal View Manor. You don't have a choice if you want to get into public housing. So again, it's to try to deconcentrate.
How many units do you have?
We have 390 public housing units. 200 of those are at Royal View Manor. The other 4 are at Highland Park, Oak Park, Eastview, and Southview. And those 4 properties are elderly designated. So the tenants there are 61 and a half years old or older. And then we have some public housing scattered sites, but those are minimal, and I'll talk about that here briefly.
Of the 200, how many are available? Or, I mean, I know we've had some issues there with different floors and units.
Yeah.
And are there dozens that are out of service, or are there?
No, actually, right now I think we only have 1 that's in maintenance hold.
Okay.
We have 19 vacancies, and we have a waiting list. Most people are looking for a 1 or 2 bedroom. We only have about 68 1-bedrooms and only half dozen 2-bedrooms. The rest are efficiencies.
Oh.
Okay.
We do have a submittal into HUD because of the 19 vacant units, that they're all efficiencies, to convert those to 1-bedrooms, which doesn't change the number of units that we serve, but it makes them more attractive to the general public. So we're in that process right now, waiting for HUD approval and to make those minor renovations to try to get those filled up. But we do have a waiting list of over, I think, 398 people for public housing. But some of the people, they don't want any efficiency, so they turn down the opportunity.
So when you convert the efficiency to a 1-bedroom and it doesn't change the number of units, what's the square footage of that efficiency that's been converted versus an already existing 1-bedroom?
It's reduced by the width of the wall, so very minimal. The layout is the same. All there is there's a wall and a door that separates an efficiency from an L shape into a 1-bedroom. But the public wants that privacy and that door to separate their bedroom unit from their living space.
Okay.
So it's a minimal reduction in overall square footage. As a part of that process, the agency believes that we still need to own and maintain at least another mixed-age population apartment complex. So we would be looking to acquire a 150-unit somewhere in the community. Our intent and my goal is to purchase existing property as opposed to building new. There's vacancy issues, there's tenant issues, and there's property available within the community. So we will be looking at that in combination with acquiring these leased units from private landlords to diversify and deconcentrate public housing throughout the community. In addition to that, we're trying to expand our supportive services. We provide educational information to the agency, the people that come into our agency, whether it's financial foundation class, energy-wise classes, and then the scattered site single-family homes became before the Municipal Housing Governing Board a little while back, and we are in the process of renovating 10 single-family homes to put those back into our public housing portfolio. That project is currently under review by HUD, and we're waiting to hopefully get that started here sometime this summer. We just hired the architect. The Public Housing Board approved that contract at their last meeting to do that work.
Doug, how are you going to pay for the expanded supportive services?
We have grants that we've applied for, so we have, and our grants were just renewed. We have 3 full-time people dedicated towards supportive services that we do through Family Self-Sufficiency, and then creating greater partnerships with the Community Action Agency, which provides financial foundation classes, energy-wise classes. So it's just linking our customers with existing services and bringing them in, and then seeking other grant opportunities as well. The homeownership program is another initiative. Right now we have our 5H program, which the Municipal Housing Governing Board has approved those forgivable loans. Currently, a person has to qualify for 100% of the value of the homes. They take out a mortgage for 2/3. The housing agency takes out a mortgage for the second third. If they live in that property for 7 years crime-free, we forgive that loan. So we extremely overqualify them from income guidelines because they have to qualify for 100% even though their mortgage is for 77%. We're looking to reduce that so they're still overqualified but make it so it's not such a burden. We also have funding available that we can use to support down payments and closing costs, which is a big issue for low-income families that can afford the monthly principal mortgage payments, but they don't have the down payment or the cost for closing. And with that would be some home ownership classes and a program that we have. It's called Section 8 Home Ownership, where our Section 8 clients that are in family self-sufficiency can use that voucher funding towards their principal and interest payment to get them into affordable housing and home ownership.
Excuse me, Doug, on the acquiring foreclosed properties for homeownership, would that also include multifamily? So if they're multifamily units that have been converted to multifamily, would there be an opportunity to make them single-family again?
The opportunity would be there. We would have to research and look at that and the cost to convert, but we can get into acquisition and then reselling to one of our existing clients. So the next steps, we're looking to implement the conversion of the Community Action Agency site offices. The timing's sort of an issue because we get ebbs and flows of clients that are coming in. Our current lease expires in June 30th. So we're hoping to implement 4 Mile and Logan within the next month, and then Pioneer Columbus at the end of June, beginning of July. We've amended our agency plan. We did a significant amendment that's been approved by HUD related to the replacement housing factor, building those single-family homes. This evening we'll be in front of the Municipal Housing Governing Board to approve our 2012 agency plan, which then will be submitted to HUD for review and approval. And then once that's approved, we can begin to implement those strategies.
So you have been approved?
Our significant amendment, which was presented to the Governing Board a couple months ago, has been approved, and that's related to the replacement housing factor proposal of the single-family homes I talked about.
No, I understand. It said you're waiting for approval, but
that's for the significant amendment for the plan that's coming this evening. That will be submitted. The significant amendment was for the current year, 2011. That we're waiting for approval on. The plan that's coming this evening for the Governing Board still has to be submitted upon Governing Board action, and then we will submit that to HUD, and HUD has 100 days. That's the Royal View piece that I talked about. And then HUD has 90 days to approve. If we hear nothing back from within 90 days of submittal, it's automatically approved.
How will you decide for what price and how and when you're going to sell Royal View?
Under the federal guidelines, we have to sell it for fair market value. We had an appraisal done in May of 2006, I believe, for $2.85 million. We would have to get a new appraisal. We have made some renovations since then, but again, according to HUD, it has to be fair market value, so we have to have an independent appraisal done, and then we would do an RFP or bid.
I can't read the mayor's mind exactly, but I think maybe the question is, what are the criteria? What are you looking for in the new unit? What kinds of proposals will you accept in terms of reuse of the building or upgrades to the building or changes?
Well, at this point, we're looking at just fair market value for private operation. If there's, we would have to look and determine if we want it to be affordable, to remain as an affordable housing complex, or if it's going to go more market rate. And that's something we would work with community development on.
On that point, could we take that as a question and come back in the future workshop and sort of, I think it's a really key issue in terms of what we do with the building and what kind of proposals would we look at favorably and so on. And maybe we need a little more thought to put down on paper some ideas and report back. Mayor, am I getting close?
Well, in part, the other piece, and Christine probably knows this better than the rest of us, but the funding for these kinds of projects and how we're going to sell it based upon whether or not they can even get it funded and the kind of money that they're going to have to put into it as equity. In contrast to like the stuff that we just approved, which was, you know, stuff that went through IFA and everything else, it'll be interesting to what kind of terms that we can accept or will accept and how we're going to get paid and what anybody can really afford regardless of whatever the appraised value is.
And as the city manager indicated, we'll develop an RFP or bid process, and that will come before the governing board before it's issued. So you'll have input and you'll see those parameters. So we'll report back. It's at this point, it's conceptual. It's in the agency plan. We have to wait until the governing board approves that plan this evening and HUD approves the plan after it's submitted before we can proceed with that process.
Is HUD going to finance it?
Beg your pardon?
Is HUD going to finance the purchaser?
The purchaser? Not, well, there's...
Are we going to finance the purchaser?
There's some developers out there that I think would have the ability to pull it together.
I think there
Well,
is
but
some.
it's
Actually, we've had 2 unsolicited requests
Yeah.
about Royal View from the private sector.
But the intent is that you would move all of the individuals from Royal View to the MART to decentralize them as you talked about in your plan.
Correct.
Okay, so they would be taking over the building without any tenants. It would be as if it were a brand-new project for them.
Yes, potentially, unless there's some vouchers
Yeah.
that are issued and some of the tenants want to remain there and they're willing to accept Section 8 vouchers.
So it wouldn't be any different than a tax credit project. They could go and apply for tax credits at IFA, and I think there was one project on the list this year that was on the south side that was a rehab type of similar.
But that would be the whole point, don't you think? Because they wouldn't get in on this round.
No.
They'd have to get in maybe on next round, so what are you going to do in the interim?
Well, right now, it will remain a public housing unit with our public housing tenants, so it really depends on the private.
We've got a long ways to go.
Yeah, right now, it's...
You're anticipating it's going to be a year to
Yes. at
unwind
least.
this thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good job.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions? Let's turn back in your books to CDBG, and we'll get back on the agenda. Thank you, Doug.
Mayor, members of the City Council, today is just an update on the CDBG funding and just kind of an overview of where we're at. Over the last 5 years, our CDBG funding has fluctuated anywhere from $4.2 million to about $4.6, with last year kind of being the high water mark. Pretty much over the last 10 years, if you go back even further, I believe at one time we were over $5 million, and it's kind of steadily declined since then. Usually, funding cuts is usually a pretty big target in Washington, D.C. That's kind of what we're going to go over today. Looking at the 2011 CDBG funding, just as a reminder of some of the major programs that we do fund from the dollars, $1.4 million does go into the NBSD program for the code enforcement, the inspection side of the program. $1.1 million is for the NCS for their housing programs. $290,000 is for NERP, $250,000 for the site offices, and $135,000 for scrub, and about $110,000 for demolition.
And how does that compare? It's just down slightly across the board for all of those?
Historically, it's been pretty consistent.
Okay.
There was an increase in NBSD for this past year. This is the first year that we have gone through with a 50% reduction in the funding that has gone to the nonprofits. So a lot of that balance in funding has gone to the NBSD program.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I total up all these funds. Does that equal $4,638,000?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay. so
This is
there's-
just some of the major programs that we do fund.
All right.
Doesn't include all the nonprofit funding, and there's some other smaller funding in there too.
Okay.
Recently, the House passed the continuing resolution 1, which does recommend a 62.5% cut to CDBG. This recommendation, I know over the years there has been some large cuts proposed, even elimination of the program in the past. I do think what this does tell us is there is going to be a reduction to the CDBG program for this year. Heard in could be 10 to 15%, or even up to the 62% number. So just want to make sure bring that to your attention. One of the other items.
Senate has rejected H.R.
Yep.
1. Go ahead.
Yep. The other, just to show the impact, what that would be, it would be a reduction from the 4.6 to 1.7 million we receive on an annual basis. For the 2011 funding year, back in November, the City Council already did make the CDBG allocations. At this point in time, at that time, we were anticipating what the funding would be. It's kind of the annual process where we do go through, where we do project what we're going to be receiving. With that amount being unknown at this time, depending upon what the final reduction would be, I do anticipate coming back to Council if we are going to have to adjust some of the allocations that we did make to the CDBG projects based on the November 22nd Council action. Just looking at CDBG funding and how it's been used, and here in Des Moines, one thing with CDBG is that it is leveraged with other funding. For every $1, we do leverage $4.62 of other funding. There's quite an impact with the number of individuals that are assisted. Over the past 5 years, over 22,000 individuals have benefited from CDBG funding through the variety of programs that we do offer. And in addition, there's been 110 jobs created over the last 5 years through CDBG funds. Over $1 million spent on economic development activities, 1.1 on public improvements, 3.9 on public services, and the largest portion is over $10 million for housing activities. The other federal funding that I know is under consideration and could receive some funding cuts. For the home program, we receive a little over $1 million a year. Included in that same budget proposal, they are looking at a 10% reduction in that funding. The homeless funding is, the discussions are funding that at the same levels. And CSBG, which was some of the funding that I know Doug alluded to, they are looking at a 55% reduction there as well. And any questions?
We're good.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
We'll move on now to the Army Corps of Engineers River Flow Frequency Study. I think, isn't that what we're doing now?
Yes, sir.
Morning, Mayor, members of council. My name is Jeb Brewer, city engineer. This morning we'd like to take some time to present to you a summary of some of the flood risk associated with Des Moines and the impact of a recent Corps of Engineers study that came out when they looked at the river flows along the Des Moines River. Presentation this morning will be in two parts. I'll give a brief presentation on the flood risk and some of the impacts to infrastructure, and Phil Delafield will then give some impacts on potential impacts for development related to our floodplain management program. Just as background, Des Moines, like many older cities, is located along a river. Early development along the river had many advantages with transportation and water supply. Des Moines is located at the confluence of both Des Moines and Raccoon, which makes some complexity in estimating the flood frequency or the anticipated flood flows through the river. In addition, the Des Moines River is considered a regulated river in which that there are flood reservoirs, Saylorville being upstream of us and Red Rock being down. Both of those reservoirs do impact Des Moines. Saylorville seems more intuitive since it's upstream of us and they can regulate the outflows. Red Rock does have the ability to back water back up into the southeast part of Des Moines. And then again, those reservoirs, since they're managed by the Corps of Engineers, they have to operate those reservoirs in concert. And they also have to look at not only the flooding in Des Moines, but along the whole Des Moines Basin and also along the Mississippi River. So their decisions oftentimes have to consider factors outside of just flooding within the Des Moines area. As I mentioned, the Corps, as our city developed, since we do have flood risk in Des Moines, as the city developed, we've also developed flood protection measures. This graphic here just shows our system of levees and stormwater pump stations that we have in Des Moines that help us manage that flood risk throughout the city. But managing our flood risk is really more than just infrastructure. I mentioned we have about 24 miles of levees, 21 pump stations, and we continue to modernize this infrastructure as time goes by. In fact, since 1993, we spent over $116 million in modernization to our levees and pump station systems. But our flood protection system also includes operations, personnel, equipment, materials, and also organization. I think Council, unfortunately, these last couple of years has seen the city in action where we have to take particular flood fighting actions and closing levee openings and operating pump stations and all the things that the whole city has to do in order to reduce the flood risk for Des Moines. That being said, all the efforts that we put together as our infrastructure and operations for flood fighting really have to first start with answering the question, what do we need to prepare for? What do we need to build our levees to and our pump stations to accommodate? And that has to be answered with a question that may seem simple, is really how high will the water get? And that question has a lot of things that have to be answered. One is obviously the rainfall. How much rainfall will we get? Well, we can look at historical rainfall patterns and try to make predictions about what future rainfall patterns will be. But we've seen that the past rainfall patterns may not be what we see in the future. That's a difficult question, which a lot of people have spent some time and research on. Also the land use. When the rain falls on the basins, how it runs off the land, it depends upon the land use, whether it's urbanized or rural farming practices or tiling practices. And we see that those actually change over time. So it makes the ability to predict future flood events based on historical even more difficult. There's also the operations of the reservoir, Saylorville and Red Rock, as we mentioned, that those impact how high the water will get in Des Moines. But one of the primary ways that is predicted, we use to predict future flood is historical data. And as I'll talk about here, the historical data, you'll look back in history to see how high the flood's got, how high the flood water's gotten, and then try to make predictions on what the future will be. One of the things about historical data is we really don't have that much historical data. We have less than 100 years of good flood flow on the Des Moines River. You know, in Europe, you may have 300, 400, 500 years of data. So it's more difficult to make predictions in the future when you have a shorter historical period. And again, all these conditions are variable, so it is a challenge to predict in the future what the flood flows will be and answer that question, how high will the water get? Well, recently, here in January of this year, the Corps of Engineers updated a study that they had done to make these predictions, how high the water get. Actually, what they looked at was what would the discharges be, and I'll make a little distinction between discharges and elevations of the river. And so they came up with this study they called the Regulated Flow Frequency Study. And what they did is they looked at additional historical data. They looked through the record of period through 2008. Currently, the FEMA is coming out with some new maps this year in which the historical period goes through 2005. We all know that 2008, 2010, we had some high water events. The Corps went and then incorporated those historical events, these recent ones, into that analysis. And they've come up with that their prediction for future flood flows is higher than what is currently in our regulated plan. And of course, these increases are going to be different at different locations in the river. They're going to be different for different reoccurrence storms. But just to give an idea of the magnitude of it, if we look at the 1% chance storm, sometimes termed the 100-year flow, if you look at the gauge at Southeast 6, the Corps is saying for that recurrent storm, their prediction is that the flows will be 24% higher than we currently have in our flood protection plan. And that's a significant increase. Now again, our levee systems and pump stations are based upon historical analysis of what we think the water elevations are going to be.
When you say higher, do you mean the water is that much higher, or there's that much more water going by that spot?
That much more water going by. That's the discharges. Again, they look at the flood flow frequency. They look at the discharges, how much quantity, volume of water passing by that point. The elevations are obviously related to the discharge, but there are things that can increase the elevations or decrease elevations with the same discharge. But if we don't make any changes to our river system, a 24% increase in discharge will mean additional height. It doesn't mean an additional 24% height, but it does mean a predicted higher level of floods for the 100-year.
I want you to make that perfectly clear to everybody so that we're not talking about...
We're not talking about 24% increase in elevations. That's a discharge. One thing to point out is that since our systems are based upon historical flows, our current levee heights and pumping stations, our levee heights all exceed any historical flood elevations we've seen. So if you take back all the past data, the current levee heights that we had would be sufficient, would be high enough for any of these historical floods. But the question isn't really what happened in the past. What we have to do is what's going to be in the future, because that's where our concern is.
But on that point, Jeb, the flood of 1993 was at our record high flood.
Yeah.
And that flood did not top the levees.
Did not top the levees.
As they exist today. So it's an important point to keep.
Once the Birdland and Central Place improvements are in place. So that is, again, to say, you need to put this in perspective that even though this is an increase, we do have fairly robust flood protection systems in place, but we need to be proactive. We need to take the information as we get it and make plans for the future so that Des Moines continues to have adequate flood protection in place. Now, as the mayor pointed out, the study didn't analyze flood elevations. It analyzed just the discharges. So that kind of leads me to the next point. Well, I'll make a little bit of distinction here. The Corps of Engineers is a federal agency which builds and manages reservoirs, helps us build levees. They do a lot of things with the river, but and one of the things they've done here is they've analyzed the discharges. However, the Corps of Engineers is not the agency that develops the accreditation or the flood insurance rate maps. These are tools that we use in our floodplain management, and FEMA is the organization that does that. FEMA is the one that establishes the flood insurance rate map, which tells citizens whether they need to have flood insurance and what rates they're going to pay. It establishes a term we call base flood elevation, which is essentially the flood elevation in which we need to provide protection to. And they're the ones that eventually accredit a levee system to say that levee system is sufficient to withstand the base flood elevation. However, the information that the Corps used to do their study would be the same historical information that FEMA would use to come up with a new base flood elevation. What's a little confusing is FEMA will be coming out with new maps this fall, but those maps will only be looking at the historical data through 2005. They will not be including the information that the Corps had recently analyzed in January. However, FEMA will start redoing that, taking that process, taking that data, and relooking at the maps and reanalyze them. It's always a continual process. If we get more data, you have to reanalyze it. So FEMA is anticipating by 2014 that there may be revisions again to our flood maps, and based upon the Corps study, we anticipate that those revisions to the Corps maps would show an increase to our base flood elevation. Now, at this point, we don't know exactly what those would be, but we can get an idea because of the Corps study.
Jeb, The Corps can do an analysis. Why can't FEMA and the Corps get on the same page?
Well, it's
Minor
really,
detail there, but
yeah, it's really,
Jeff, do you have an answer to that?
yeah. Well, I don't have the philosophical answer, but
I spent 3 days in front of Congress talking about that exact issue, and I got to tell you,
well, it just doesn't
I
make sense.
didn't get a clear answer.
well, one thing is FEMA's mission, since it's a regulatory process with the firms and the base flood elevation, they have to go out and publish. There has to be public comment. When the Corps does their study, bam, we get it in January. I mean, there isn't really a public comment on that. The FEMA has to go through and they have to consider lots of different things. Now, obviously, there are some differences in techniques from what the Corps is looking at and what the FEMA, and they have their own regulations. So that does create some frustration with us, is that maybe they're not on the same page all the time. But they do work together. But you have to remember that you may think that FEMA and Corps are saying different things, but FEMA can't just be changing these maps every month, because we base zoning, we base development. There's a lot of things that they have to go through a formalized process to make these revisions. So there's always this lag time on the mapping. But we want to be proactive and use the best information available to make the decisions that we have to do. Now that kind of leads to the question, well, we have this flood improvements based upon this data which has already been provided by FEMA, but we do know that the Corps has done the study. What should we be doing right now? Well, we don't want to sit back and just wait till 2014 until the new maps come out. There's probably some things that we need to do now to prepare ourselves for that. Again, we have levees and channel improvements and operational changes that may need to be done in 2014, but we do need to be making changes now in preparations for that. And the question will come up once we decide what those changes need to be done. We haven't had the ability to do that analysis to know what is our plan forward based upon this new information provided by the Corps. Once we have that plan, then we also have to put together a funding scenario. Traditionally, our flood protection has been funded through federal, state, and city funds. The type of improvements and the timing of those improvements will have a big impact on what kind of funding we think will be available for us. As far as immediate actions, actually in tonight's council meeting, there are 3 items related to impacts associated with this core flood flow frequency. One of them is we're in the process of making improvements to a couple of pump stations. While we don't know what the exact new elevations will be in 2014, it really is prudent for us to make changes to the projects that we're building now in preparation for that, even if we have to make some estimations of what the impacts would be. For Jackson Basin, there's a change order in order to increase the pump station, so if we need to raise the levee there, the pump station and the retaining walls and the gate wells will be built to that new height, so we won't have to go back and make changes to something that we're building right now. And that's a prudent investment. It's really kind of a minor investment if you look at the total flood infrastructure, and it really saves us money, because when you go back and do something after you've already built it, it always costs more than if you can do it right when you're in the construction process. Again, we have an agreement with the Corps of Engineers for the construction of Birdland and Central Place Levee, and tonight there's a modification to that agreement that allows the Corps to go ahead and increase the height of Birdland and Levee so that it will be higher than what they compute would be under their current core flood flow frequency. Now that, again, we don't know what the FEMA base flood elevation will be, but since we're building the levee right now, it makes sense to go ahead and add that additional height to it now, and the Corps is willing to do that if we enter into a modified agreement with
Jeb, it's worth pointing out, this is a Corps, the Berlin and Central Place are Corps of Engineer contracts. So the change orders that Jeb is referencing are processed through the Corps of Engineers. The council has the great good fortune of cost sharing on that additional cost. And so when you see this on your agenda tonight, you'll see a fiscal impact where, in effect, we have to fund 35% of the cost of that additional levee height that has to be provided. It's unfortunate that that's there, but there is no better time to do it than right now. I think, as Jeb has pointed out, it's a very cost-effective time to do it. It would cost much more to come back later, and you clearly want to be in a position to make the levees at the proper height. So it is on your agenda. It is something that we've worked hard with the Corps to move this along promptly, and that's why it's there. But it does have a fiscal impact on the city.
And also tonight is a contract on for us to enter into an agreement with Stantec Consultants. Stantec is the firm that actually had been doing hydraulic analysis for FEMA in this latest map revision. We want to bring them on board so that we can take the information that the Corps has provided to us, look at the City of Des Moines river system, and come up with essentially a plan for what kind of improvements we think are going to be the most cost-effective for the City of Des Moines. Just simply adding height to levee may not always be the answer, and we may need to look at things that are a little more maybe different than what we've traditionally done. We may need to look at removing constrictions through the river system. One of the proposals we've investigated is possibly removing the old railroad bridge just downstream of Scott. There's some things that we can do to help mitigate some of these increases in flood flows that wouldn't necessarily just mean a levee rise. But that's a difficult question to answer, and we need some very skilled analysis so that we can come up with a plan that's going to be the most cost-effective and something that we can implement with the city and what we anticipate for future funding. I do have a point up there. We met recently, and we've actually been meeting quite a bit with the Iowa DOT on the US 65 bypass. Part of this solution to this overall problem is the DOT will be building some additional bridges on that bypass in order to increase the conveyance capacity through the bypass, and that will reduce some of the elevations in the southeast part of Des Moines, and that will also potentially help all the way up to downtown, depending on the eventual configuration of the rivers. They're planning to do some of those improvements in 2013, and we want to work with the DOT to make sure those improvements get built, and they've been very cooperative on that, but that's just another piece of this puzzle. There'll be lots of individual projects that will probably come out of this study.
So the actual bridge modification, this is the existing bridge?
It's the existing roadway. The embankment, US 65 as it crosses the Des Moines River, that has a bridge for that, but the embankment approaching to the bridge does have some constriction of flow across the floodplain, and their proposal is to add additional bridges, new bridges, so that the water can get through there and it won't back up as much as it does in the southeast part of Des Moines.
Because it's an earth and fill in there.
Yep,
correct?
yep. The
Right.
approach is essentially like a levee. I mean, it's just a bunch of dirt, and that blocks the flow of water across the floodplain.
It's almost better than a levee.
Depending on
It's
which
like a dam almost.
depending on which side you're on, but
That's for sure.
but they've been analyzing it, and I think they've got a good plan for and those improvements will be very significant to the city of Des Moines. We want to encourage the DOT to go ahead and put those improvements in 2013.
You know, just one thing to add, what you see before you here on this slide represents what we're trying to do is a very aggressive approach in dealing with the flood impact issues on the Des Moines River. If we let the normal process unfold through the Corps of Engineers study and congressional appropriations, I hate to think how long that would take. So what we're suggesting here is that we proceed quickly, and it's really, I suppose, all of these actions, but particularly that consultant analysis, the Stantec contract that Jeb mentioned, is a way for us to sort of short-circuit that process and begin to identify the kinds of strategic investments that will help mitigate the problem that this new core flood frequency study has indicated that we have. And I couldn't recommend anything more strongly to you than these set of recommendations and then the actions that will come out of that. Again, if we let the normal process go, it just takes too long, in my view, to let that happen. So this is a way for us to move it along. It's going to take a huge concerted effort on your part, on the city's part, hopefully the state, hopefully the federal government to move these improvements along. But I just think it's vitally important that we do it and do it as quickly as we can. And this presentation today, the actions you have on your agenda tonight are all sort of built around that theme of trying to say, let's see if we can move these solutions along more quickly than would otherwise be the case. And so that's why it's here. And I applaud the efforts of Jeb and his staff. Bill's not up here, but Bill Stowe has been a huge player in moving these issues as well. And we have a great team there in place, but they have a lot of machinery to move here to get the work done. And what you're seeing here is really the first first major effort on our part to advance these issues, and I recommend it to you strongly. Again, you've got 3 of these items that Jeb has noticed on your agenda tonight, and hopefully that Highway 65 bridge modification is something that with IDOT's cooperation we can bring back to you with a fairly definitive solution, hopefully in the not-too-distant future. So very, very important items.
So the consultant analysis, when it comes back, then it will will it also have financial information, where we're going to be able to go?
That's another piece of the puzzle. I mean, and like, since we are kind of trying to move things as fast as we can, I mean, we just got the study in January, is that we're going to be taking smaller pieces. Stantec's really kind of it's a fairly limited study. It'll basically help us come up with a game plan. It will not identify funding opportunities. We do have other resources on board, like our lobbyists in D.C. and even some of the efforts that we have with Hirsch and Blackwell that will be doing some of that funding. Stantec's simply a technical analysis. It's not a design. It's simply to take the information that the Corps has provided, which is a fairly technical study, review that, and then look at the flood modeling within the river system and say, here's some potential projects that you could come up with. Because the type of project determines the type of funding. So then we'll have to come back and make some very difficult decisions about what's our game plan, and then try to put the pieces together and start the advocacy for that funding, what we can afford, the timing of those pieces. Right now, we don't have those answers.
As an example, I mean, Jeb mentioned the bridge modification. So you remove one of the old rail abandoned bridges, or you raise another bridge. All of those things can help mitigate the problem we have, and they're good solutions, even though they would be expensive. It's far better to do those kinds of things than to go back and try to elevate the levees and so on.
Or even make changes at Saylorville. You know, if there was going to be changes at Saylorville, well, that'd have to be a Corps project. There's nothing the city could do with that. We'd have to advocate through a Corps be a federalized project. Removing the railroad bridge, well, we don't even own it yet, so we'd have to buy it, but that would be something that the city would do, and we typically can do it much quicker through our processes than a federalized process. So we would say that's one we could do. Let's go do it as a city project, and we wouldn't try to federalize it. So those are difficult questions, but we can't answer those until we.
Okay.
And we have some time for Phil on the development side. So
we are. Before you get up, Phil, it's 8:45. We had one other presentation to do after this, and presumably questions. Do you want to, Mayor, I'll ask you, and Council, do you want Phil to postpone this one? We have one from the police that's critical to hear today. Can you go through yours very quickly? You've got a lot of material there, if I recall.
Can you hit it in 5 minutes?
probably not 5.
Run through it very fast.
Come on.
Might cover with too much information, slow me down, and I'll drop some of it. Mayor and Council, Phil Delafield, Community Development Director. As mentioned by Jeb earlier, there are development issues. Many of you have asked us, what are we doing, what are we telling the developers? Because these questions that you are asking about our flood protection systems are also being asked by the developers. So in essence, a brief history here. The point is with this slide that we've had some flood regulation in Des Moines since 1965. We have implemented the firm plans, the flood information rate maps in 1981, and the state regulations were also implemented in 1965. We matched the state regulations, which is 1 foot above the regulated flood elevation, the base flood elevation. So just by way of information, historical information, we have been active in flood protection for quite some time. The flood insurance rate program is a complicated set of acronyms. I don't want to bore you with all of these. There are many there for your reading pleasure. The important one here is the shaded Zone X, which is a area of allows unrestricted development, and that's where we're trying to be in our development behind the levees. So I'm just going to show you that this is a panel from the flood insurance rate map, and it describes different layers of protection based on where you're located in proximity to the levees or to the river. And it's all based on flood risk. As you can see, there are different areas of different protection. Flood shaded X is the one that we're concerned with mostly for this presentation. There are requirements in the floodplain management program that are based on the use. Residential, you can elevate your habitable areas above the regulatory elevation. You also need to elevate the heating and air conditioning and electrical systems. You have to build without basements, and you have to build your crawl space that allows water to flow through. Similar protection is allowed on commercial sides of things. You are protecting the structure. You can elevate development. You can do ring levees. There's lots of options there, although they are all have cost implications, and you'll have to measure the value of each improvement with the protection you get. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the regulations, the answers to developers change based on where you're located in the floodplain. We tried to break this out so that you can understand the various answers. Birdland Central Place, the levees are now under construction. We want to show you that the Birdland and Central Place areas will experience a period of time where the flood protection elevations come into play for new construction. So currently it's flood zone X and it's protected by a levee. You're allowed unrestricted development in those areas. Once the levees are complete, but before they're accredited, they will become firm zone AE, which means that they will need to have some protection if it occurs during that time period. And then in the future, and what we're targeting here is that it will return to firm zone shaded X, and unrestricted development will be allowed once again. In the southeast area, it is another section of the community where this one's a little more complicated because there will be a period of time where there will be no flood elevations established. This is the information that is coming from the Corps and going to FEMA, and they will then determine the flood elevations that we have to protect to. And that means, because it will become firm zone A, it means that the developers in those areas will have to do a study to provide their own elevations and then an engineered design to protect to that elevation. We are hoping that FEMA will eventually determine the flood elevations, and then that the Corps will also likewise take some measure of protection in the southeast area. But in the future, then, we do not yet know what the firm zone will be. There may be other options, there may be other answers there. Yes, sir. Downtown area, similar. We have a lot of investment in the downtown area. There will be no period of time where we are required to protect at a different level. It will remain flood zone X during the interim period, and we hope then in the future, as the study matures, we're able to decide what protection is appropriate, then we would move to protect to the flood zone shaded X. We will anticipate a few other steps that we will need to match the zoning map with the new floodplain. We will need to match the U1 and floodway to the new regulatory floodplains. And there will be some new grandfathering and legal nonconforming structures that are created in those times. We also propose that we need to reassess the disparity between the zoning ordinance and the floodplain management. For those of you that are intimate with this information, there's a 60% threshold in the zoning ordinance and a 50% threshold in the floodplain management. We want to match those up so that they are equal, 50% across the board there. So these are the impacts. The current rates, the insurance rates are going to be impacted, but if you buy your insurance now, the preferred risk rates are available for two years, so a grandfathering of rates will occur. We anticipate that future rates will increase. Physical improvements are required. This is what Jeb was alluding to, the levees, the channel improvements, the operational changes, and there are multiple sources of funding required to do this. The message to property owners that we're delivering is the city is carefully considering improvements. The development is allowed subject to the floodplain regulations, and we are encouraging everybody to buy their insurance now. It's available to everyone in the community. And if there are any questions, there is the www.floodsmart.gov website that answers many questions on the floodplain management program, and I'll attempt to answer any you may have.
Phil, do these requirements also, are they used in the Walnut Creek area and 4 Mile Creek area?
The flood insurance rate maps address those areas, but we're not anticipating changes because of this flood frequency study to those areas.
Thank you.
Thank Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Let's go ahead and move forward. And Chief, I'm going to ask you to come up now and with Major and quickly go over this, if you don't mind, and we'll have Don.
It's Parks one first, thanks.
What are we doing?
Well, Don, are you going to start, or?
Yes. I'll be brief. Mayor and Council, Don Tripp, Park and Recreation Director. A park system doesn't provide the service it can provide, needs to provide, without it being, first of all, safe. Ours is very safe. It's perceived as safe. We have a few slides here today to talk about the 4 pillars of that as it relates to our program and design and security. Finally, this is a joint presentation between ourselves and the police department. I want to introduce to you John Hagner, who's in charge of our recreation programs. And with that, I'll let you take it away, John.
Mayor and Council, John Hagener, Park and Recreation Superintendent. You may recall we did a citizen survey in 2009, and the results of that survey are in front of you. You've seen these before. I just wanted you to know that many of the respondents that we asked was, did you feel safe in different areas of your neighborhood? And you can see the results there. You should note that many of the respondents were actually neutral, and only 9% felt unsafe. Either way you interpret that, we want to assure you and the citizens that we will continue and are working on a plan to keep citizens safe. We're going to do that with, these are the 4 components that we have and will continue to incorporate with park safety. We'll start with just the mere design of a park in itself. The furniture, for example, the benches you may recall at Gateway Western Park, for example, those are designed, as many of you may know, to deter homeless to sleep on. We look at traffic patterns in our park systems. For example, at Greenwood Park and Grandview Park, those parks formerly had roads that led to a dead end that did not really promote positive behavior. We've eliminated those just by merely redesigning the park. Of course, our 911 stations provide the perception of safety as well. As far as the police, they have been, in my 13 years with the city, they've been just extremely responsive and just very cooperative to work with. Clearly, that's the second component of our plan, if you will, and that's the code enforcement. The code enforcement, of course, Chapter 74, that's the very codes that Council has approved. Some of those, for example, are that we require park use permits for large-scale events. They have to come up with a plan. Many times that plan has, will you have police? What are you going to do about parking? What are you going to do about trash? Et cetera, et cetera. So they have to show us a park use permit. Alcohol is not permitted in any of our parks unless they're a private party reserving just 3 of our shelters. So those are just examples of the rules and the codes that we have the police obviously enforce. In terms of patrol, we hire and will continue to hire the police to patrol the parks you see listed there. The third to the bottom there, it says directed patrol the north side. That includes parks such as Union, Birdland Marina, Cheatham, Prospect, and Drake. And we will continue to have a high level of patrols. You can see we had nearly 2,000 hours of police patrol last year. We anticipate that number to be equal or greater this year. The third component to promote park safety is park maintenance. Our goal is to have hate graffiti removed within 24 hours or less, and gang graffiti removed within 72 hours. Just a cleaner park promotes a safer park. As far as programming, the fourth component, and I feel the best opportunity to promote public and park safety, is just park use, park programming. Last year alone, we had 1,400 uses at our park shelters. That's where people were renting the shelters. That's about approximately 70,000 people. Studies have shown that the more use, the more positive activity, the safer the park will be. Continuing to have, I don't want to steal the police's thunder, but continuing to have the police activities leagues, and those types of activities are just critical to our safe programming. That programming is specific to all of our parks. Now, specific to Evelyn K. Davis Park, I want to just take 2 seconds because we have to introduce, we have staff dedicated to that park for maintenance and other things, but John Turpkosh, who is in the audience here today, he has been just a critical component and instrumental, quite frankly, in just getting programming going at the park. Just some of the programming that he has been in charge with. And we'll continue to have this free drop-in program Monday through Friday at Evelyn K. Davis. You can see last year it went Monday through Friday to 4. That will be expanded to 7 p.m. this year. We're just tweaking and just continuing to add to that. We'll also take that program into the fall. Many of you know about the free lunches that the school provides. We're going to continue that again this year. It should be noted that the police last year stepped up and provided 2 weeks of lunches because the program just didn't coordinate, and they provided lunches so that the kids...
Are you looking for additional support for the lunches?
This year we're okay. This year we're okay as far as the lunch program. We've got it coordinated, yes. I'll tell you what, this Davis program and keeping this safe and programmed doesn't happen alone. I'm so glad, and Wayne Ford and the Urban Dreams has been a pivotal part of that whole program as well. They had a huge presence at the park. Wayne's going to just hand out an item after Major Waymeyer is done with his presentation, but thanks to the Urban Dreams and the many, many partners that have helped just program Evelyn K. Davis. Also, you should note that John Turpgosh will be leading a committee, obviously with Urban Dreams and others, to just continue to look at programming for that park. In terms of other, just 2 more quick slides, the other security measures, we have the parks will install. We have installed video cameras at just different parks of our system, and the police will monitor those for us. We also have the 911 posts on the trails. That'll tell the police dispatch exactly what location and if there's any problems there. Last slide here, just finally some future measures. When it comes to environmental management, we're continuing to evaluate the lighting. Just last week, we had a meeting with the police. We recognize that there's some lighting issues at one of our parks. We're going to continue to look at those, as well as traffic patterns. Landscape management, anytime we can clear out an area, make it visible, so that the homeless camps can't develop, so the meth labs can't hide, we're looking to do that. So to recap, what we'll do to continue to promote park safety is park design, code enforcement, maintenance, and programming. Just trying to move it along here to get our agenda caught up. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Major Waymeyer, if that's okay.
John, I've got a quick question.
Yes, Skip.
On your Davis Park free drop-in program, what's happening between August 13th and September 27th?
August 13th, September 27th. Actually, John is here. You want to speak to that, John?
We'll just have a fall program. We've now gone into a fall programming up there as well as spring programming this year. So we'll be going spring, summer, fall. So it'll be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday after school pretty much. And then Wednesdays, we're going to start from 1 o'clock till 7 o'clock every Wednesday. Since school gets early out, we'll have a presence there with activities, beefed up activities.
According to the handout, there's nothing between August 13th and September 27th, but it's going to continue after August 13th?
Correct.
Thank you.
Chief?
Good morning, everyone. It's too bad they had to rush through that. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Judy Bradshaw, Chief of Police with the Police Department. I really want to commend Don Tripp and his staff. They've highlighted the components to their approach in the parks. And it's not going to be very far away, but you're going to begin to receive phone calls from citizens asking about these kinds of programs, asking about, increased numbers, and really what is the takeaway from this morning's meeting. And really the takeaway is that we're going to have enhanced outreach. As John just outlined, the hours are going to reach further into the evenings. There's going to be more programs. You're going to see the Police Athletic League up and running, and we're going to be sponsoring some basketball, some soccer, coordinating with parks, Urban Dreams. You're just going to see more of us out there in the parks. And we're going to use our NBSD program to enhance our outreach. Similar to the parks, we also have 3 different components to our approach to public safety in the parks. The first one is by supporting the kids programs. And that's not just in Evelyn Davis, but that is throughout the city of Des Moines. The second piece of it is enforcement. And as outlined by John in the various parks that we cover, we're going to do something different this year. We are going to enhance our enforcement in the parks, and this will be on a citywide basis. We're going to have a team of officers that will report to a sergeant that will respond across the city. Sometimes there's special events that happen in the downtown area. We'll pull those officers down there into the Court Avenue area, in addition to the off-duty employment that's already occurring down there. We've got a whole host of special events that are occurring all over the city. This special team of officers, headed up by a sergeant, will be able to relocate to those hot spots, and certainly with an emphasis on the parks. The third concept actually was, it's a unique program. It's a brand new program for the police department. It was developed in concept by our former police chaplain, Reverend Lewis. And his concept was that he and potentially other community leaders would be willing to be called out on as a response team into the parks and at certain violent situations, such as a shooting or homicide or whatever the occasion is. And Reverend Lewis, very frequently, we would pick him up and we would bring him out to the parks, and he would help in communicating with some of the kids that were out there in the area. He'd make follow-up phone calls to some of the parents. And so what we've really done with his idea is, through this ambassador program that Major Waymar is going to fold out for you this morning, is what we are going to do is just formalize his concept. We're going to work with the leaders in the community, Kale Samad, Wayne Ford, and members of the faith-based community. We've already met with the Black Minister Alliance, and we have a commitment by the pastors that they will participate in our ambassador program. We've also asked all of the churches to come up with 3 to 4 names of other members of their congregation that would be willing to come out and participate in our ambassador program. We look to them to help during special events that are coming up, and we also look to them to be present, again, on an on-call basis. In the past, what we've done is left it up to that watch commander, the captain that's in charge of the midnight shift, the afternoon shift, which is normally when we did these response call-outs, and they would call up a KO or Wayne Ford or Reverend Lewis directly, and these folks would come out to the scenes, and they were extremely successful there within the parks. And we hope, again, to formalize that this summer. So, again, the takeaway is enhanced youth programs, greater hours into the evenings, and then a greater coordination really between the police department and the community leaders. So with that, I'm going to have Major Waymar go into the formal presentation. For those of you that haven't paid attention, Chief O'Donnell retired a couple months ago. Major Waymar has been promoted, and he's currently taking up his chair, and he is doing an absolute outstanding job. He runs the Patrol Services Bureau. So, Major.
Morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I too want to echo what the chief said about parks. They've been outstanding to work with, and with the parks discussion, we thought it was an opportune time for us to unveil our security efforts and community efforts for the summer, many of which are centered in the park. As the chief said, we've developed a 3-pronged approach. First one is community outreach. We've continued to increase our community outreach efforts through the years. Second one is the community ambassador program that the chief gave you an overview of, and then finally enforcement, because every part of the police summer involves some type of an enforcement plan. Community outreach, I'll just begin by telling you the things we did last year. Many community events, National Night Out, Urban Dreams Summer Youth Program we assisted with the parks and the schools. Juneteenth, Mount Hebron Back to School, and that's Mount Hebron Baptist Church Back to School, Clowns of the Carousel. Those are just a few. Also, our police activities leagues was involved in basketball, softball, a soccer camp that we developed with members of Drake soccer team, and the Junior Explorers program. And the Junior Explorers program was started just this past year in cooperation with Urban Dreams, and we're currently in the schools once a month, 3 different junior highs. Also, our neighborhood-based service delivery sergeants and officers have done an outstanding job attending meetings. To give you an idea of how many meetings last year, they attended about 108 community events and had interaction with over 4,000 youth. Many of those youth are at risk. This summer, We plan on partnering with the Des Moines Parks and Rec through with our PAL program. We've already agreed to a basketball league and a soccer, to help sponsor basketball league and a soccer league. Our softball league, excuse me. We're going to be in the Evelyn Davis Park for Juneteenth, Mount Hebron's Baptist Church Back to School Fair. We're going to have a Des Moines Men's Soccer Camp, and we will be assisting Urban Dreams with their summer programs again this year. Those are just a few, just to highlight what we can do. Our Community Ambassador Program, as the Chief mentioned, was basically, in theory, was developed by Reverend Lewis. We're trying to push that forward. Community Ambassador Program is a team of volunteers consisting of community leaders and clergy of all denominations, serving as a liaison between the police department and the community. This is our way to have help diffusing situations, but not only diffusing situations. We plan on using our community ambassadors to participate in community events, to walk around and be representatives of the community and the police department. We've seen this work in events such as I'll Make Me a World celebration the last few years. They've had volunteer security wearing the same colored t-shirts, just walking around to make sure that the kids are having fun and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it works because if you know people there, you're less likely to act out, and that's the idea behind that. But also for us, it's important to use the ambassador program to help diffuse potentially volatile situations such as violent crime shootings, serious assaults, and even police officer use of force situations. We're not saying that everybody has to agree, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's not the time to have that discussion. The community ambassadors will be there to help us diffuse the situation. As the Chief said, the watch commanders will make arrangements for the ambassadors to get there. If there's further discussion to have, we will have that discussion the next morning, but we don't want to see anybody else get in trouble. We've designed a shirt we're going to give out to the community ambassadors so that they're easily identifiable. And along with that shirt, we're going to have an ID lanyard to wear around the neck, because many times, obviously, it's winter time and that shirt's not going to be out and about. But when we have special events, especially, the community ambassadors are going to be out and they're going to be wearing the shirt and interacting with the officers and the community. I think we plan on unveiling this shirt today in a press conference at 11 o'clock when we talk about our summer initiative plans. We'll have members from the Black Ministerial Alliance there as a part of that press conference. The third prong we talked about a little bit was our enforcement efforts. Excuse me. In 2010, some of the things we did, especially last summer, many of which were patrol related or park related. We had a juvenile initiative. When we started having problems in Evelyn Davis Park the end of last summer, we had several gang grants that we've used, and we used them strategically. When we had word that there was going to be problems in the park, we used additional gang grant funds to provide additional patrol presence there. We based it on intelligence and the weather. When the weather was going to be nice, especially in the fall, we knew that there was going to be more activity. We used more of our gang grant funds. We targeted our traffic enforcement officers to hotspots. We assigned them to areas where we've been having issues. We reassigned some patrol personnel to those hotspots. We continued with our downtown efforts, and that's what PUSH is our downtown enforcement efforts on the weekend nights especially. And the park patrol, as Parks mentioned, over 1,800 hours of police presence in the parks. And some of them are stationary and some of them rove between several parks. For this year, we're going to continue with our PUSH unit, which is our downtown enforcement, patrol use of supplemental help. They're assigned downtown on weekend nights. They assist with Court Avenue entertainment districts, and we also provide then a supervisor for bar close time, basically, when we know there are several thousand people all coming out of the bars at the same time. We have officers inside those bars, many of them working off duty. This will provide extra officers to assist with that and a supervisor to make sure everything's going smoothly. Our efforts this summer will include an enforcement team, as the Chief mentioned. We're going to make a team using our SROs and officers from patrol on temporary assignments for the summer months. They will be non-trip responsive. They will be available to handle hotspots wherever they're needed citywide. This also is going to allow us to provide a supervisor. We're going to put a supervisor in charge of this team. That supervisor will also be monitoring all of the officers, the 1,800 hours worth of officers we have in the parks too. We think that's going to provide better coverage. That's a quick summary of our summer initiatives. Do you have any questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
Major, thank you very much. And I know that how hard the Parks and the Police Department and all of our community partners have been working to increase the perception and the reality of safety in and around the city and specifically in the parks. So thank you all so much. Anybody in the public? Wayne, any comments you'd like to make real quick?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Our former representative, Wayne Ford.
It's a pleasure to the city council members and the mayor. This is deja vu. My first job out of Drake, I was with the Park and Recreation Department. That was many years ago. That's how I started. I was in charge of the Model City Community Center 25 years ago before I started Urban Dreams. So I call this full circle. You all gave me $10,000 in 1984 with the late, great Elaine Simoniak. And that $10,000 many years ago has brought you $1 million program called Urban Dreams. We've had some good days and bad days. You all know who I am. But the bottom line is when it comes to that community, I risk my life every day, and my work speaks for itself. I feel honored to work with the Park and Rec and the Des Moines Police Department. Right last year, these two individuals, Gwen Marshall, William Chumley, they're the ones out there. They work for the Junior Explorers program. They're the ones in the park. I put my Urban Dreams blue on. That's my Urban Dreams blue. Don't pick it like it used to be, but that's my Urban Dreams blue. Because where we come from, that's our uniform. The police got theirs, we got ours. Couldn't wear the hat, because I think y'all let me wear the hat in here. Last year, these individuals came to you. You didn't give us one dime. I took $30,000 of in-kind service. When the problems happened in the park, I took $30,000 of in-kind service and say, staff, good luck. You got $100,000 life insurance. We going to the park. Is that right or wrong, staff? Yes. Because I do pay my staff $100,000 of life insurance. Don't have a lot of money to pay them. But you risk your life every day when you do what I do. So that the record go loud and clear. But because of that, the summer is much safer and we're ready. I'm very happy to say that the $30,000 in-kind service they have given, and we also have a report I will put right here. Excuse me, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay. That's the report that we made. That'll show you the impact, because I learned something along the way. You also say, Mr. Ford, you got a lot of emotions. When you going to put your things on paper? Well, that's on paper. The impact that we gave the city of Des Moines and everybody last year working with the Park and Rec and the police department, it has graphs, it has the numbers, it has everything. So as I close, I'm just here very happy that me and my staff can be here and to let you know that it's not just one segment of this community. It ain't just the police department and the fire department that the people see in that neighborhood late at night. They see representations from Urban Dreams, and we're ready for this summer. And to all the fractions out there and the young kids, we've already told them, we'll be in the park this summer, we'll be at the Iowa State Fair. Let the word goes out loud and clear. Des Moines is a good city and a safe city, and we're all going to work together. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. Wayne, thank you all and your team for all the great work you guys have been doing through the years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I want to thank you all for your patience this morning, and for those of you that are so inclined, we'll see you this evening. This meeting is adjourned.